Hello, Pastor Brian here. I'm going to look at something in Genesis chapter 32. Jacob is returning home in that chapter after being away for 20 years. And he is as scared at this point as he can be. He had left 20 years before, and his brother Esau had vowed that he was going to kill Jacob as soon as Isaac was dead. And so in chapter 32, he's come back into that land of Canaan, and he's heard that Esau now is coming with 400 men. And so Jacob, he's running scared. He is trying everything he can think of. This man who's always been a conniver and a strategist, he's thinking everything he can to appease Esau. So he sends a series of gifts with some of his servants ahead, to come to bring to Esau, a series of gifts. And then he took his family and belongings, divided them into two groups, thinking, well, if Esau attacks one, at least the other can get away. But here he is, and he sends them off. And it says in verse 24 there that then Jacob was left alone. So there he is by himself. That must have been a very fitful night for Jacob. What's tragic is that he's not doing what God wants him to do. He's not relying on him. He's not resting in the Lord. You see, God had told him very plainly that he would be with him, and he would bless him, and he would return him to his home safely. But Jacob is doing what he's done all of his life, and that is conniving and strategizing and trying to work angles. You can tell that the guy's filled with fear. And that leads to a wrestling match that night. It goes on in verse 24 and says, "And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day." It was an all-night wrestling match with this stranger. We're going to discover who that man is. It's actually Jesus. Brethren, we can do that. We can find ourselves wrestling with God regarding certain situations in our own lives. Where God is desiring to bring us to a place of just total surrender to Him. And we resist, and we fight, and we want what we want. How far God is going to break Jacob of that. What a tough nut Jacob was to crack. And so this wrestling match goes on all night. Literally has to bring Jacob to an end of himself, his own self-efforts, his own self-desires, his own self-ways, before he can truly, fully bless him. So that's what's going on here. When we find ourselves wrestling with God about something, I say this is what we ought to pray. Two things. We ought to pray, Lord, pin me down and you win. Whatever it takes, pin me down and you win. And secondly, help me to learn what it means to trust you, Lord, completely. Trust you completely. Well, they're wrestling. Verse 25, now when he, Jesus, saw that he did not prevail against him, or Jacob was just not letting go, he touched the socket of his hip. Don't get the idea he just touched it. No, I think you could say he hammered the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. This guy, that is the strongest part of your body. And he just dislocated it. Jacob will be a cripple now for the rest of his life because of this wrestling match. I think there's a spiritual lesson for us here. Mostly, it's our strength that is preventing us from really being used by God, not our weaknesses. because we find ourselves relying on our own strength. And God wants to break us of that. So this is what's going on here. It says in the next verse, and he said, this is Jesus said, let me go, for the day breaks. Jacob, his hip's out of place, but he's just clinging and won't let him go. And Jesus is saying, it's time to let me go. But he, Jacob, said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. You really got to understand what's going on here. Because we don't see, just the way that this is being said. Like you're reading in the Garden of Eden when God was looking for Adam and Eve, and he was crying out, Adam, where are you? He wasn't the voice of an arresting a policeman. It was a loving father calling out to his son, his child. So here's Jacob crying out to Jesus and just clinging to him. And it says in Hosea chapter 12, actually verse 4, and yet he struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor from him. He was weeping. He was crying out and clinging to him. So what do you have here? Here's this guy that feels boxed in on every side. He's got nowhere to turn. And now he's just been hammered in battle with Jesus. And the guy is broken. He's broken now. And he's crying out and clinging to him. So the next verse, verse 27. And he, Jesus, said to him, what is your name? And he, Jacob, said, Jacob. Now Jesus knew his name was Jacob, but he wanted to hear him say it. Say your name. It's Jacob. The name means a supplanter. It means a heel catcher. You could interpret that as this guy, a conniver. And so he says that name. And really, it's an admission, yeah, I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner. And he's come to that point. And at that point, the next verse, and he, Jesus, said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God. You have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Israel means ruled by God. And he says, you are now a new person. He says, you have struggled with men, and that struggle has always been with the blessing of God in his life. He's had God's help every step of the way. But he says you have struggled with God in that wrestling match. And what he's saying there is he was just clinging and holding on to him until he was brought low and he was broken and he surrendered to him. You see, Jacob was now just a broken man, just completely surrendering to the Lord. And now you got a new name, ruled by God. So he's no longer a man of the world. He is God's man now. He's a new person. And so we read there, Jacob, verse 29, asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. He blessed him. It was sort of like, you really don't need to know my name. You know who I am. We know specifically who that was. Who was one who was a man, but he was actually God. That was Jesus himself. So there was Jesus. This is where Jacob's life was radically changed. I would ask you, have you been truly broken before the Lord? Or are you kind of hanging on to your own self-interests? And you just don't want to let go of them, whatever they are. Have you surrendered everything, I mean everything, to Him. Let Him win that wrestling match. So you are surrendered before Him. You know, in Luke 9:23, Jesus told His disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself. Take up his cross daily, whatever life means now. And whatever I've got to surrender and give up, whatever area in my life's got to die before the Lord, and follow me. You know what I would say, brethren? Most wonderful thing in the world. Follow Jesus. Keep following Jesus, no matter what. In the end, you can't lose. Period. Hey, God bless you. Carry on. Talk to you later. Bye.